Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. The first night in my grandmother's house, I heard the trees whispering. Not the gentle rustling that trees normally make in the wind. This was different. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks after the long drive to Arkansas with an 8-year-old and too much gas station coffee. But deep down, I knew better. My name is Rebecca Powell. 3 months ago, I was a nurse in St. Louis, a widow trying to raise my daughter Lily after losing my husband in a car accident. Today, I'm standing on the porch of my dead grandmother's farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, wondering if I've made the biggest mistake of my life. The house sits in a valley that locals call Blackwater Hollow. It got that name from the creek that runs through the property. Water so dark it looks like ink, even on the sunniest days. When I inherited the place, it seemed like a gift, a chance to start fresh, a place where Lily and I could heal. "Mommy, can I go look at the creek?" Lily asked, tugging at my sleeve. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes wide with excitement. "Not alone, sweetie. We don't know the property yet," I said, looking out at the dense trees surrounding our new home. The forest seemed to press in from all sides, watching us. The farmhouse was old, built in the 1800s, but solid. It came with chicken coops, goat pens, and enough land to grow all our food. My plan was simple: live off the land, homeschool Lily, and find the peace that had eluded us in the city. I had some savings and my nursing skills to fall back on if needed. That first week, our neighbor, Silas Thornton, came by to help. He was in his 60s, weathered like old leather, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "This place needs work," he said, hammering a loose board on the porch. "But it's good land, always has been." "Did you know my grandmother well?" I asked. Something flickered across his face. Everyone knew Martha. She kept to herself mostly. But she helped folks with her remedies. Remedies? Herbal medicines. Your grandma knew every plant in these woods. He paused, his hammering. Some said she knew too much. I laughed, but Silas didn't join me. Later that day, I found a box of my grandmother's journals in the attic. They were filled with drawings of plants, recipes for tinctures, and notes about the healing properties of local herbs. The handwriting was neat at the beginning, but became more frantic in the later entries. On one page, underlined 3 times, were the words, "The plants that walk at night must not be disturbed during the joining time." I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman. I had science and nursing training. Old superstitions didn't scare me. 2 weeks into our new life, I noticed Lily collecting strange black stones from the creek bed. They were perfectly smooth, almost like polished glass. "Look, Mommy," she said, proudly, showing me her collection arranged in a perfect circle on her bedroom floor. "They like to be together like this." "They're just rocks, sweetie," I said, but something about their perfect arrangement made my skin crawl. To keep an eye on potential predators, the 4-legged kind, I set up game cameras around the property. When I checked them after the first night, most showed nothing unusual, but one camera, pointed at the edge of the forest, showed strange lights floating between the trees at 2:14 a.m. Even stranger, the timestamp jumped from 2:15 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. With no explanation, camera malfunction, I told myself, nothing more. Our first trip to the general store in the nearby town introduced us to Henry Miller, the owner. His smile was genuine as he helped us load our supplies. "Powell, eh? Martha's kin?" he asked. "She was my grandmother," I nodded. "Good woman. Knew her place in the valley." He glanced at Lily, who was examining a jar of candy sticks. "Cute kid. How's she liking the hollow?" "She loves it, we both do." He nodded slowly. "Just some friendly advice. Don't trouble the old trees when the moon's full. They get restless. I laughed, thinking it was local color meant to spook the city folk. We'll be sure to leave the trees alone. As we drove home, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road. In my rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw the shadows move independently of the trees that cast them. That night, I bolted awake at 3 a.m. The house was silent. Too silent. No crickets, no frogs, not even the sound of wind. I went to check on Lily and found her sitting upright in bed, staring out the window. "Lily, what are you doing awake?" She didn't turn to look at me. "The trees are moving, Mommy." I followed her gaze. In the silver moonlight, the forest's edge looked exactly as it should, still and ordinary. Yet something about it made my heart race. "It's just shadows, baby. Go back to sleep." As I tucked her in, she whispered, "Grandma says we belong here. She's been waiting for us." My blood ran cold. "Grandma? You never met Grandma." Lily's eyes were already closing. "Not yet, but I will." I told myself it was just a child's imagination, that the isolation was getting to us both, that the strange feeling in the pit of my stomach was nothing more than anxiety about our new beginning. But as I lay awake until dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in Blackwater Hollow was awakening, something that had been waiting for us. And despite all my rational thinking, one thought kept circling in my mind. The water in the creek wasn't black because of minerals or soil. It was black because something in these woods had tainted it long ago. 2 months passed, and summer settled over Blackwater Hollow like a warm blanket. Our vegetable garden thrived, the chickens laid eggs daily, and the goats provided fresh milk. On the surface, we were living the dream I'd imagined when we moved here. But underneath, something was changing. It started with Lily's new friend, Mr. Whispers showed me how to make the flowers grow faster, Lily said one morning at breakfast. She was pushing her eggs around her plate, something she never did before. "Mr. Whispers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Is he a friend from your dreams?" Lily shook her head. "He lives in the woods. He's very old and knows lots of secrets." I told myself all kids have imaginary friends. It was normal, especially for a child who'd moved to a secluded place with few other children around. But the name, Mr. Whispers, made my skin prickle. That afternoon, while Lily napped, I walked the property line. I'd been meaning to check the far corner where I planned to expand the garden. What I found stopped me cold. Perfect circles about 3 feet across dotted the ground every 20 paces or so. Inside each circle, the grass and weeds were completely dead, the soil dry and grey, as if all life had been sucked out of it. It knelt and touched the soil in one circle. It was ice cold, even though the sun had been beating down on it all day. "That's how it starts," came a voice behind me. I jumped to my feet. Silas stood there, looking more worn than usual, his eyes on the dead circles. "What are these?" I asked. "Signs," he said simply. "They're marking their territory." "Who's marking what?" Silas just shook his head. "You should keep your girl close, Rebecca, especially at night." That night, I woke to the sounds of chickens in distress. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried out to the coop, expecting to find a fox or coyote. Instead, I found half my chickens dead, their bodies intact but covered in their own feathers. They'd pecked themselves bloody. The surviving chickens huddled in the corner, trembling, their eyes fixed on the woods beyond the fence. I followed their gaze, but saw nothing unusual in the darkness. The next morning, I found Lily's drawings scattered across her bedroom floor. They showed trees with faces hidden in their bark and strange symbols that looked like tangled roots. When I asked her about them, she just smiled. "Mr. Whispers is teaching me the old language," she said. "The one the trees speak." That same day, I found another of my grandmother's journals, hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. This one was different, bound in what looked like tree bark, the pages stained with something dark. The entries described entities my grandmother called root walkers, beings that looked like trees but could move at night. According to her, they had been in Blackwater Hollow since before humans arrived. They need us as much as we need them, one entry read. Every 50 years the joining comes. The chosen ones become part of the forest, and the root walkers learn what it is to be human again. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. This was crazy. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe my grandmother had been suffering from dementia in her later years. But then I remembered Lily's words about Grandma waiting for us. That evening, I walked to the small family graveyard on our property. The headstones dated back to the 1800s, ancestors I'd never known. My grandmother's grave was the freshest, the earth still settling. But something wasn't right. The ground around several of the older graves looked disturbed, as if something had pushed up from underneath. I ran my hand over my grandmother's headstone and froze. There were tiny roots growing out of the carved letters of her name, like green. Veins spreading across the stone. A storm blew in that night, fierce and sudden. Lightning flashed every few seconds, turning night to day. In those frozen moments of brightness, I watched from my bedroom window as the trees at the edge of our property swayed. Not with the wind, but against it. They were forming a circle around our house. I told myself it was a trick of the light, of my tired mind playing tricks. But then Lily appeared beside me, her face pale in the lightning flashes. "It's starting," she whispered. "The joining happens every 50 years. They come to trade places with people." "Who told you that?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Mr. Whispers and Grandma." Lily's eyes reflected the lightning. "They're coming for us because we're special. Our family has always been special." The next day, I drove into town and went straight to the county library. The old librarian helped me find historical records of Blackwater Hollow. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Every 50 years, dating back to 1817, the population of the valley dropped dramatically. Not from disease or war or natural disaster. People simply disappeared. And always during the same month of the same year, like clockwork. This year marked exactly 50 years since the last disappearances. On the drive home, I saw Silas's truck parked at the edge of my property. He was standing in the field, staring at the dead circles, which had grown larger. "Tell me what's happening," I demanded as I approached him. "What are these root walkers? What do they want with my daughter?" Silas looked at me for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "My family has watched over this valley for generations," he said finally. "We're not part of it. We're just the watchers, making sure the old agreement is honored." "What agreement?" "The one your ancestors made with the forest." He looked toward the trees. "The root walkers are ancient. They were here before anything else. But they're forgetting what it means to be alive, to feel, to think like we do. Every 50 years, they need to remember, or they'll just become trees again. Regular trees." "And how do they remember?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They take vessels. Human vessels." Silas wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your family has provided those vessels for centuries. Your grandmother was supposed to be the last, but she didn't have children of her own, so she brought you here instead." I felt sick. "You're saying my grandmother wanted these things to take me and my daughter?" "Not take," Silas corrected. "Join with. It's not death, Rebecca. It's transformation." I backed away from him, shaking my head. "You're insane, all of you." But as I turned to run back to my car, I saw Lily standing at the edge of the woods. She was talking to someone, or something, I couldn't see, and for the first time since we'd moved to Blackwater Hollow, I was truly afraid. Not just for our lives, but for our souls. That night, the full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting silver light over Blackwater Hollow. I packed our bags while Lily slept, planning to leave at first light. Whatever curse or madness gripped this valley, we would have no part in it. But as midnight approached, I noticed the shadows outside moving. not wind-blown branches or animals. The trees themselves were moving, their trunks bending and roots pulling free from the earth. I ran to Lily's room and found her bed empty, the window open. "Lily!" I screamed, racing outside in my nightgown, flashlight sweeping wildly across the yard. The trees had formed paths through the forest, like welcoming arms. And at the end of one path stood Lily, her small hand held by something I couldn't quite see, a shape that kept shifting between that of a tall man and a gnarled tree. I ran toward her, but the ground beneath me writhed with roots that hadn't been there seconds before. They wrapped around my ankles, holding me in place. "Let her go," I cried out. The shape beside Lily turned toward me. In the moonlight, I could make out a face, not quite human, the skin textured like bark, eyes deep set. And ancient. When it spoke, its voice sounded like leaves rustling. "She comes willingly," it said, "as all your family has for generations." "I don't understand," I sobbed, still struggling against the roots. Then see! The creature, the root walker, approached me. As it did, the other trees closed in behind, forming a perfect circle around us. It reached out one long branch-like finger and touched my forehead. Images flooded my mind. Memories that weren't mine. My grandmother as a young woman meeting with the root walkers. Her mother before her and her grandmother before that. All of them making the same agreement, to provide vessels for the forest spirits. I saw what happened during the joining. Humans merging with the ancient tree beings, their consciousness becoming part of the forest, while the tree spirits experienced human life for a time. And I understood the terrible truth. I was never randomly called back to Blackwater Hollow. My grandmother had arranged everything, leaving me the property, ensuring we would arrive exactly 50 years after the last joining. When the visions cleared, I found myself kneeling on the ground, the roots gone from my ankles. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why us?" "Your bloodline is special," the root walker said. "Your ancestors discovered long ago that they could communicate with us. They made a pact. We protect the valley and all who live here, and in return, every 50 years, some of you join with us." "Join?" I whispered. "Become part of us, and we become part of the human world for a time." I looked at Lily, who stood calmly watching. "And my daughter?" "She has been preparing. The young one who will join with her has been teaching her our ways." "Mr. Whispers," I realized. Lily nodded, smiling. "He's lonely, Mommy. He wants to know what it's like to play and go to school and have birthday parties." For the first time, I noticed changes in my daughter, subtle but undeniable. Her skin had a faint texture to it, almost like fine bark. And when the wind blew, her hair moved differently, more like leaves than human hair. "What's happening to her?" I asked, though I already knew. "The joining has already begun," the root walker said, "as it has with you." I looked down at my hands and saw patches of rough, bark-like skin spreading across my palms. How long had that been there? Had I been drinking the water, eating the vegetables grown in this soil, slowly changing all this time? I tried to run, back to the house, but the forest kept shifting around me. Paths that should have led home suddenly curved back into the woods. Trees that hadn't been there before blocked my way. Dawn found me exhausted, collapsed at the edge of the property. The trees had returned to their places, looking as normal as ever. But I knew what I'd seen. Inside the house, I discovered thin roots growing through cracks in the foundation, weaving through our food supplies. They'd been in our water, our vegetables, everything we'd consumed since arriving. Lily seemed different. That morning, calmer, more connected to the land. She spent hours sitting in the garden, her hands buried in the soil, eyes closed as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "We can still leave," I told her, kneeling beside her. "Right now. We'll never come back." Lily looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "It's too late, Mummy. We're already part of it." That night, I noticed I no longer felt hungry or thirsty. Instead, I craved sunlight and rain. The rough patches on my skin had spread, and tiny hair-thin roots sometimes extended from my fingertips when I touched soil. I tried calling for help, but the phone lines were dead. When I attempted to drive to town, the roads kept looping back to the house, no matter which direction I took. The valley was keeping us here. As the lunar eclipse approached, the time the route walkers called the final joining, I made one last, desperate attempt to save Lily. I found her sitting by the Black Creek, trailing her fingers in the water which seemed to respond to her touch, swirling in impossible patterns. "Lily, please," I begged. "Fight this. Whatever's happening, we can stop it." "Your bloodline is special," the route walker said. "Your ancestors discovered long ago that they could communicate with us. They made a pact. We protect the valley and all who live here, and in return, every 50 years, some of you join with us." "Join?" I whispered. "Become part of us, and we become part of the human world for a time." I looked at Lily, who stood calmly watching. "And my daughter. She has been preparing. The young one who will join with her has been teaching her our ways." "Mr. Whispers," I realized. Lily nodded, smiling. "He's lonely, Mommy. He wants to know what it's like to play and go to school and have birthday parties." For the first time, I noticed changes in my daughter, subtle but undeniable. Her skin had a faint texture to it, almost like fine bark. And when the wind blew, her hair moved differently, more like leaves than human hair. "What's happening to her?" I asked, though I already knew. "The joining has already begun," the route walker said, "as it has with you." I looked down at my hands and saw patches of rough, bark-like skin spreading across my palms. How long had that been there? Had I been drinking the water, eating the vegetables grown in this soil, slowly changing all this time? I tried to run, back to the house, but the forest kept shifting around me. Paths that should have led home suddenly curved back into the woods. Trees that hadn't been there before blocked my way. Dawn found me exhausted, collapsed at the edge of the property. The trees had returned to their places, looking as normal as ever. But I knew what I'd seen. Inside the house, I discovered thin roots growing through cracks in the foundation, weaving through our food supplies. They'd been in our water, our vegetables, everything we'd consumed since arriving. Lily seemed different. That morning, calmer, more connected to the land. She spent hours sitting in the garden, her hands buried in the soil, eyes closed as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "We can still leave," I told her, kneeling beside her. "Right now. We'll never come back." Lily looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "It's too late, Mommy. We're already part of it." That night, I noticed I no longer felt hungry or thirsty. Instead, I craved sunlight and rain. The rough patches on my skin had spread, and tiny, hair-thin roots sometimes extended from my fingertips when I touched soil. I tried calling for help, but the phone lines were dead. When I attempted to drive to town, the roads kept looping back to the house, no matter which direction I took. The valley was keeping us here. As the lunar eclipse approached, the time the route walkers called the final joining, I made one last, desperate attempt to save Lily. I found her sitting by the Black Creek, trailing her fingers in the water, which seemed to respond to her touch, swirling in impossible patterns. "Lily, please," I begged. "Fight this. Whatever's happening, we can stop it." I still hear them at night, the sounds of hooves circling our house. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm back there in those woods, watching the deer standing like people, their eyes fixed on our windows. But let me start at the beginning, before the hunger came. My name is James Hopkins, and in the summer of 1972, I made the worst decision of my life. I bought 120 acres of forested land in northern Minnesota, convinced it would be paradise for my family. My wife Karen supported the idea. We were both tired of city life and wanted our kids, Noah and Emma, to grow up connecting with nature. The land seemed perfect. A sturdy old cabin built in the 1930s, several small outbuildings, a beautiful maple grove, and a natural spring with the clearest water I'd ever tasted. When we first drove up that dirt road in our station wagon loaded, with everything we owned, the kids pressed their faces against the windows, eyes wide with excitement. Noah was 13 then, already showing a keen interest in the outdoors. Emma, just 9, clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit and asked if there would be real ones in the woods. "This is it," I said, stopping the car in front of the cabin. Our new home. The cabin looked even better than in the photos. Sturdy logs, a stone chimney, and a wide porch facing the forest. We spent those first weeks cleaning, repairing, and setting up our homestead. Karen planted a vegetable garden while Noah and I chopped firewood and fixed the roof. Emma helped collect berries and explored the area near the cabin. Pine Ridge, the nearest town, was 17 miles away down a winding road. We'd make monthly trips for supplies we couldn't produce ourselves. The locals seemed friendly enough, if a bit reserved. They'd smile and nod, but didn't offer much conversation. We were outsiders, city folks playing at wilderness living. At least that's what I thought then. Only Abigail Townsend, the forest ranger who occasionally checked on properties in the area, showed any real interest in our family. She would stop by every few weeks, always bringing small gifts, homemade jam, local honey, or handcrafted toys for the kids. "You folks settling in all right?" she asked during one visit, her eyes scanning our property in a way that made me slightly uncomfortable. "Just fine," Karen answered, "though the wildlife here is different." It was true. Karen had noticed strange things about the animals. Deer would stand at the edge of our clearing, watching our cabin for hours without moving. Ravens followed us on walks, hopping from branch to branch above our heads. Birds that should have migrated south were still hanging around as summer turned to fall. "Animals know things we don't," Ranger Townsend said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Best to pay attention to their warnings." About a month after we moved in, Noah came running back to the cabin, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, Mom, I found something weird in the woods." He led us about a half-mile from the cabin to a small clearing. There, partially hidden by undergrowth, was a circle of stones. Each stone was about the size of a basketball, arranged in a perfect circle about 12 feet across. Some had carvings on them, strange symbols I'd never seen before. Inside the circle were small animal bones, arranged in patterns that didn't look natural. "Probably just some old Native American site," I said, though something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Best to leave it alone, show it proper respect. That night, while organizing some things in the cabin's small attic, I found a journal that must have belonged to the previous owner. Most pages had been torn out, but the remaining ones contained disturbing entries about winter visitors and something called the Long Night. One entry particularly stood out. They're watching the house again. The deer, standing in that circle like they're waiting. I know what they want. God help me, I can't stay another winter. I didn't show the journal to Karen or the kids. No need. To scare them with the ramblings of some lonely old man driven half crazy by isolation, I thought. As autumn deepened, Emma developed a strange cough. It wasn't like a normal cold. It came in spells, mostly at night, and sounded dry and painful. We took her to a doctor in Pine Ridge, but he couldn't find anything wrong. "Maybe it's allergies to something in the woods," he suggested. The weird thing was, when we stayed in town overnight at a small motel, Emma's cough disappeared completely. But as soon as we returned to the cabin, it came back worse than before. "Maybe we should think about moving back to the city," Karen suggested one night after Emma had a particularly bad coughing fit. "Let's give it until spring," I said. "We've invested everything in this place." The next morning, we woke to the first snowfall of the season. It wasn't much, just a light dusting that covered the ground in white. But when I went outside to get firewood, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Surrounding our cabin, in a perfect circle, were deer tracks, dozens of them, all facing inward toward our home. I followed the tracks all the way around the cabin. Not a single track led away from the circle. It was as if the deer had appeared out of nowhere, stood watching our home, and then vanished. That night, as the snow fell heavier, I could hear something moving outside, circling, waiting, and somewhere. Deeper in the woods, I heard what sounded like laughter. Winter had come early to our new home, and something told me it would be the longest winter of our lives. The snow that started that day didn't stop, not the next day or the day after that. Within a week, drifts piled higher than our car, and the road to town disappeared under a white blanket that kept getting thicker. "This isn't normal," Karen said, looking out the window with worry lines creasing her forehead. "The weather report said we'd get maybe 6 inches, not 3 feet. I tried the radio again, but all I got was static and strange, whisper-like sounds. That might have been voices. The phone line had gone dead 3 days ago. "We've got enough food for a few months," I assured her, trying to sound confident. "And plenty of firewood. We'll be fine until they clear the roads." But that night, while checking our food storage in the cellar beneath the kitchen, I noticed something odd. Our carefully stacked cans and jars didn't look right. I counted them, twice to be sure. We were missing food. Not a lot, just a few items here and there, but enough that I was certain someone or something had been in our cellar. I checked all the locks, all the windows. Everything was secure. There was no way anything could get in without us knowing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the cabin. That night, Noah woke us up, his eyes wild, his pajamas soaked with sweat. "Dad, Mom," he gasped. I was running in the woods on all fours. I could smell everything, the mice under the snow, the sleeping bugs in the tree bark. I was hunting something, or something was hunting me. Karen held him tight while I got him a glass of water. "It was just a dream, buddy," I said. But the look in his eyes made me wonder. The dream had seemed so real to him that he was shaking. "I know where the old creek bends now," he said quietly, "and where the big rocks make a cave on the north side of the property, but I've never been to those places." The next morning, I went to check the trap lines I'd set for rabbits. The snow had finally stopped, and the forest was silent in that special way that only happens after a big snowfall. About a mile from the cabin, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Standing between 2 pine trees was... I still don't know how to describe it. It looked like a deer, but was standing on its hind legs like a person. It must have been 7 or 8 feet tall, with a head that seemed too large and antlers that branched out like twisted hands reaching for the sky. Its eyes reflected the sunlight like mirrors. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a normal deer on 4 legs bounding away through the trees. "You're getting jumpy, James," I muttered to myself. "It's just the isolation playing tricks on your eyes." When I got back to the cabin, Emma was arranging small bones on the floor of her room. Bird bones, mouse bones, things she must have collected from around the property. "Honey, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Making the pattern," she said, not looking up. "The one in the circle Noah found." The arrangement did look strangely like the stone circle, and something about it made my stomach knot up. "Where did you get all these bones?" "They give them to me," she said simply. "At night, they tap on my window." That evening we tried again, to get a radio signal. Through the static, we finally caught part of a broadcast, but it wasn't the news or music. It was a voice speaking in a language I'd never heard before, all harsh sounds and rhythm that made no sense. Then, for just a moment, it switched to English. "The feast approaches. The long night comes. Prepare the vessels." Then back to static, Karen found me in our bedroom later, going through the previous owner's journal again. "James, what's happening here?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I didn't have an answer for her. But that night, on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, we found out just how bad things could get. We woke up at dawn to Emma screaming. When we ran outside in our pajamas and winter boots, we saw what had frightened her. Surrounding our cabin was a circle of dead animals, rabbits, foxes, even a small deer, all arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward just like the tracks had been. Each animal had been opened up, their insides removed, but there was almost no blood in the snow. While Karen took the kids inside, I walked the perimeter of this grisly circle. That's when I noticed the symbols carved into nearby trees, the same strange markings that were on the stones Noah had found. The carvings looked fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored against the dark bark. But how? I whispered to myself. There were no footprints in the snow except ours. Later that day, while the kids were napping and Karen was keeping watch, I decided to check a part of the cellar I hadn't explored before. Behind some old shelves, I found a hidden door that led to a small room lined with bookshelves. The books were old, some academic texts about anthropology and local folklore, others handwritten journals like the one I'd found. One book was open on a small desk, with a notebook beside it full of someone's scribbled notes. The book showed detailed drawings of something called a Wendigo, a creature from Native American legends that was associated with winter, starvation, and cannibalism. The notes described transformation rituals and something called the winter feast cycle. I was still reading, my blood running colder with each page, when I heard a knock at our front door. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the shape of Ranger Townsend. I let her in, grateful to see another human face after weeks of isolation. "Thought I'd check on you folks," she said, stomping snow from her boots. "Nasty winter we're having." But something was off about her. Her eyes darted around our cabin, lingering on the kids. She seemed thinner than before, her cheeks hollow, her fingers twitching slightly. "Been having any unusual experiences?" she asked, her voice casual, but her eyes intense. "Dreams, visitors, animals acting strange." Before I could answer, Emma started coughing violently in the other room. Townsend's head snapped toward the sound. And for just a second, I swear her eyes reflected the light like mirrors, just like the deer thing I'd seen in the woods. "The cycle is progressing," she whispered almost to herself. "Right on schedule." "What cycle?" I demanded. "What's happening to my family?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and smiled in a way that showed too many teeth. "The winter feast is coming, Mr. Hopkins," she said, "and your family has been chosen to participate, whether you want to or not." Outside, the sun was setting on another short winter day, and through the window I could see deer gathering at the edge of the clearing, standing and watching, waiting for darkness to fall. Ranger Townsend's words hung in the air like frost. I grabbed her arm, maybe too roughly, but fear does that to a person. "What do you mean, chosen? What is happening to my family?" I demanded. Karen came into the room, holding Emma, whose coughing had subsided to a quiet wheeze. Noah stood in the doorway to his room, watching us with eyes that seemed older than his 13 years. Townsend sighed and sat down at our kitchen table like she owned the place. "I suppose it's time you understood. You'll need to decide who you are in this story." She told us everything then, how the land we bought wasn't just any piece of forest, how it had been a feeding ground for centuries for something ancient that lived in these woods. The Wendigo, she said, saying the word like it was a person's name, not just a legend. It's real, and it's hungry. According to Townsend, the Wendigo wasn't exactly a monster in the way we think of monsters. It was more like a spirit that could move between bodies, that fed on hunger itself. It created starvation and need, then fed on what that need made people do. "This property has been sold 7 times in the last 100 years, she explained. Always to families with children, always to people looking to get back to the land. And always, they either leave before the first winter is over, broken, changed, or they don't leave at all. "Why are you telling us this?" Karen asked, holding Emma tighter. "Because you need to understand what's happening to your son." We all looked at Noah. He didn't seem surprised by any of this. "I can hear it," he said quietly. "In my dreams. It wants me to join it somehow." Townsend nodded. "The Wendigo needs new blood, occasionally. New minds, new bodies. It chooses carefully. Usually a child on the edge of adulthood. Someone still flexible." "And you?" I asked, anger rising in me. "What's your role in all this?" Her smile made my skin crawl. "I'm the shepherd. I've been guiding families to this place for generations. My grandmother did it before me, and her grandmother before her." "You're from Pine Ridge," Karen said suddenly. "The whole town. They know about this." "Pine Ridge exists to serve the cycle," Townsend confirmed. "We were founded by the first families who made peace with the Wendigo. We provide what it needs, and in return, our town thrives. No illness, good harvests, prosperity. You feed it." "Children," I spat out the words. "We offer it growth," she corrected. "And sometimes families choose to join rather than fight. Those are the happiest endings, really." That night, after Townsend left, promising to return the next day for our decision, we huddled together in the living room by the fire. The wind howled outside, and shadows seemed to move on their own across our walls. "We need to leave," Karen said. "Tonight." "The snow's too deep," I reminded her. "And remember what happened when we tried to drive out last week? The trees fell, across the road right in front of us. It was true. Every time we'd tried to leave over the past weeks, something had blocked our path. Fallen trees, sudden snowdrifts, even a small avalanche from a hill that had never had one before." "I don't think it will let us leave now," Noah said. His voice had changed subtly over the weeks, deeper, more certain. "Not until the feast." "What exactly is this feast?" I asked him, almost afraid to hear the answer. Noah looked at his hands. "It's when it transfers, when it takes a new host. It needs to eat the old to become the new." Emma's small voice cut through the tension. "It tried to pick me first. That's why I cough. My body keeps fighting it off." Karen gasped, and I felt sick to my stomach. "But I'm stronger than Noah," Emma continued with a child's brutal honesty, "so it went after him instead." Noah didn't deny it. "I can feel it," he said. "Parts of me are already changing. I'm hungry all the time, but food doesn't help. I know things about the forest I shouldn't know, and sometimes when I look in the mirror, my eyes look different." Karen put her arms around both children. "We're going to fight this," she promised. "We're not giving either of you to this thing." That night, I snuck back to the hidden room in the cellar to read more of the notes. What I found nearly broke me. The property, our beautiful 120 acres, was basically a feeding pen. The Wendigo controlled everything here. The weather, the animals, even how time seemed to flow differently. The notes suggested that the entire forest ecosystem was connected to it somehow. The trees, the animals, the water from our precious spring. All of it was part of the Wendigo, and worse, the notes detailed previous families, how they'd been worn down over the winter months, how they'd turned on each other as hunger and isolation played on their fears, how eventually they'd participated willingly in the feast, offering up a child to the entity in exchange for their own survival. When the lunar eclipse came the next night, Townsend returned as promised. But she wasn't alone. Several people from Pine Ridge accompanied her, all with the same hollow-cheeked look and two wide smiles. "It's time for the family to decide," Townsend announced. "Join or fight. Either way, the feast will happen. What happened next still haunts my dreams." As the moon disappeared and darkness fell completely over the forest, the Wendigo revealed itself. Not as the deer-human hybrid I'd seen before, but in its true form. It rose from the snow like it had been there all along, a shifting mass of limbs and antlers and eyes, not fully animal or human, but somehow both and neither. It moved like smoke, but had the weight of ancient trees. And it was hungry. I could feel its hunger like a physical force pressing against my mind. Beautiful, isn't it? Townsend whispered reverently. Older than this country. Older than any human settlement here. We don't fight gods, Mr. Hopkins. We feed them. No, I said, standing in front of my family with an axe in my hands. We don't. What followed was chaos. The Wendigo could control the forest, sending branches whipping at us like arms. It could create whirlwinds of snow that blinded and disoriented. But we fought. Oh, how we fought. Noah was the key in the end. The Wendigo wanted him, needed him to accept his role willingly. But our son was stronger than it knew. I hear you, Noah shouted into the howling wind. I know what you want, but this is my family. He grabbed the lantern from my hands and threw it at the shifting mass. The Wendigo went up like dry kindling, screaming in a voice that made my ears bleed. The fire spread unnaturally fast, engulfing the creature and spreading to the trees around it. Run! I shouted, grabbing Emma while Karen took Noah's hand. We raced to the car, miraculously getting it started despite the cold. As we drove away, the forest behind us burned, lighting up the night sky. Townsend and her people didn't try to stop us. Maybe they couldn't. Their god was burning. We drove through snowdrifts that seemed to melt before us, the road suddenly clear all the way to the highway. By dawn, we were 3 counties away, all of us exhausted but alive. That was 3 years ago. We live in Arizona, now about as far from northern Minnesota as we could get. Emma's cough disappeared the day we left those woods. We never went back for our belongings. Let it all burn, I say. Sometimes, though, I notice things that worry me. How Noah can always predict the weather perfectly. How animals still watch him when we go hiking in the desert. How he eats less than a growing teenage boy should, but never seems hungry. And sometimes, when he doesn't know I'm watching, I catch him staring at our neighbor's children with a look that's not quite his own. Last week, he brought home maps of isolated properties for sale. Wouldn't it be nice, he said at dinner, to get back to nature again? Somewhere quiet with lots of woods? Karen and I exchanged glances but said nothing. Emma dropped her fork. And I wonder, as the winter approaches even here in the desert, if we truly escaped that night, or if we just helped the Wendigo find a new hunting ground. I wonder if it's patient enough to wait until we let our guard down. I wonder if the feast is truly over, or if it's just beginning again, with us as its new shepherds, because sometimes when the house is quiet and dark, I swear I can hear hooves circling outside, waiting, always waiting. The first time I heard the ground breathe, I told myself it was just the wind, but wind doesn't pulse like a heartbeat, and it doesn't whisper your name. My name is Jonathan Miller. 3 months ago, I dragged my 16-year-old son, Daniel, to the middle of nowhere in southwestern Utah. A divorce will make you do crazy things, like hiding in a 100-year-old stone house built by your Mormon ancestors in the middle of red rock country. This is child abuse, Daniel said, when we first pulled up to the homestead. The house stood alone in a box canyon, surrounded by towering red cliffs that glowed like fire in the sunset. There's not even internet here. That's the point, I told him, trying to sound cheerful. 9 months to reset. You'll see the stars like never before. What I didn't tell him was that I needed this place as much as he did. After 20 years teaching geology at the university, my mind felt as dry as the desert around us. The sabbatical, to write my textbook, was really an excuse to escape from the divorce papers, from the concerned phone calls from Daniel's school, from everything. The property had been in my family for generations. My grandfather was the last to live here, decades ago. The stone house was simple but solid, with a natural spring that fed our water system and a small orchard of hardy apple trees that somehow survived the harsh desert climate. A backup generator hummed in a shed nearby. We had everything we needed to be self-sufficient. On our second day, Samuel Blackhorse arrived with our supply delivery. He was Ute, about 60 years old, with a face weathered like the surrounding landscape. "You're Jonathan's boy?" he asked, looking me over as he unloaded boxes from his truck. "Yes, my grandfather hired your father, I believe." Samuel nodded slowly. "My father brought supplies here for 40 years. Now I do it." He paused, looking up at the canyon walls. "You should stay on your property after sunset. These canyons, they change when the light goes." I laughed, but Samuel didn't join me. "I'm a geologist," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "I know these formations pretty well." "Geology." Samuel shook his head. "Rocks don't always behave like your books say." After he left, I explored the house more carefully. In my grandfather's old study, I found a stack of field journals. Flipping through them, I noticed repeated references to breathing cycles and unusual seismic patterns in the canyon. My grandfather had been a respected geologist in his day, but these notes seemed oddly unscientific. Meanwhile, Daniel had disappeared to explore. When he returned for dinner, his mood had shifted from angry to excited. "Dad, there's caves back there," he said, pointing toward the far end of the canyon. "And they're weird. The air coming out is warm, and the walls, it's like they're sweating." "Probably just condensation from temperature differences," I explained. "Pretty common in desert cave systems." But over the next few days, I noticed things that weren't so easy to explain. Our compass readings fluctuated wildly in certain spots. Dust storms appeared out of nowhere, swirling around specific points with no wind to drive them. The temperature would drop 20 degrees in minutes, then rise again just as quickly. I set up my research equipment, telling myself these anomalies would make great material for my book. While collecting soil samples near one of the dust storm sites, I found something strange, organic compounds that had no business existing in this harsh environment. Under my portable microscope, the soil looked almost alive. One evening, I found Daniel staring at the canyon walls, tracing patterns with his finger in the air. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "The drawings," he said. "Don't you see them?" I followed his gaze to what appeared to be ancient petroglyphs carved into the rock face. I'd noticed them before but hadn't examined them closely. Now, looking carefully, I realized they didn't match any indigenous rock art I'd ever seen. Instead of hunters and animals, these showed intricate patterns of circles and lines, almost like circulatory systems. Grandpa's journals mentioned these, I said, but they don't match Anasazi or Fremont styles. "They're maps," Daniel said with strange certainty. "Maps of what's underneath." That night, I woke to find Daniel standing motionless in the yard, barefoot in the cold desert night, staring at the ground. "Danny," I called quietly, approaching him. "You okay?" "Can't you hear it?" he whispered, not looking up. "The heartbeat. The whole place is alive, Dad." I led him back inside, blaming sleepwalking from the stress of our move. But as I lay awake, afterwards I could have sworn I felt a subtle vibration through my bed frame, rhythmic, steady, and far too regular to be natural. In the morning, I checked my seismic equipment. The readings showed regular pulses coming from deep underground. Nothing dramatic, but definitely not normal geological behavior. When I overlaid the pattern on my computer, it looked disturbingly similar to a heartbeat. I told myself there had to be a scientific explanation. Underground water systems, pressure changes in deep cave networks, anything but what it felt like, that the ground beneath us was somehow alive and aware of our presence. That's when I remembered Samuel's warning and the strange fear in his eyes when he looked at the canyon walls. I needed to talk to him again, Because with each passing day, the red earth around us felt less like a place and more like a presence, ancient, patient, and slowly waking up. I waited 3 days for Samuel to return with our next delivery. When his truck finally kicked up dust on the long approach road, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Someone else needed to see what was happening here. "The soil samples I've been collecting," I said, helping him unload supplies. "They contain organic compounds that shouldn't exist in this environment." Samuel didn't look surprised. "Your boy, how is he sleeping?" The question caught me off guard. "Not well. He says he hears things through the ground." Samuel nodded slowly. "It starts with the young ones. Their minds are more open." "What starts?" I pressed. "The connection." Samuel looked toward the house where Daniel sat on the porch, drawing in his notebook. "The sleeping giant speaks first to those who will listen." I wanted to laugh it off as local superstition, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't. "Tell me about this giant." "Our people have stories," Samuel said quietly. "The land here isn't just rock and dirt. Long ago, something vast went to sleep beneath these canyons. Every 70 years it stirs." That night, I stayed up reading more of my grandfather's journals. The older entries were straightforward geology notes, but the later ones grew increasingly strange. He wrote about feeding cycles and the awakening. One passage jumped out at me. "The patterns only visible from the canyon rim during the full moon reveal what this place truly is. Not random formations, but cells, massive, living cells." The next full moon was only 3 days away. Meanwhile, Daniel's behavior grew more concerning. I'd find him sitting perfectly still for hours, then suddenly rushing out to explore specific spots in the canyon. He filled his notebook with drawings, detailed maps of cave systems that he couldn't possibly have explored fully. "How do you know what's back there?" I asked, looking at a complex diagram of interconnected caverns. "I just know," he said, his voice flat. "I can feel where they go." His eyes had a glazed quality that frightened me. When I checked his room at night, I often found his bed empty. He'd be outside, walking barefoot across the red dirt, sometimes kneeling to press his ear against the ground. On my research computer, the seismic readings grew stronger each day. When I mapped them, they formed patterns like a giant circulatory system running beneath the entire canyon. My equipment showed chambers deep underground that expanded and contracted in slow, rhythmic patterns, almost like breathing. I needed to know if this had happened before. In the small town 30 miles away, I searched through historical records and found something disturbing. Every 70 years, dating back to the first white settlements, the area had experienced brief evacuations. The reasons given varied. Disease, outbreaks, dangerous weather, mining accidents, but the timing was always the same. The last evacuation was exactly 70 years ago, when my grandfather would have been living here. On the day of the full moon, the dust storms grew worse. They carried tiny particles that got into everything, our food, water, even the air we breathed. That night, Daniel had his worst episode yet. I found him standing on the canyon rim, arms outstretched. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Can you see it, Dad?" From our high vantage point, the moonlight cast strong shadows across the desert floor. The patterns of light and dark formed shapes that from this angle looked disturbingly like massive cellular structures, exactly as my grandfather had described. "What do you see, Danny?" I asked carefully. "Its body," he said simply. "We're standing on its skin." The dust in the air made my head swim. For a moment, I thought I could see it too. The landscape transformed into something anatomical and alive. Samuel arrived unexpectedly the next morning. He brought no supplies, only a warning. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "It's starting to feed." "Feed on what?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "The giant feeds through the dreamers first," he said, looking at Daniel, who sat tracing patterns in the dirt with his finger. "Your boy's already halfway gone." "What does that mean?" My voice rose in panic. "The dreaming sickness, it gets in through the dust. Makes you see things, know things you shouldn't, then it gets in your mind." Samuel backed toward his truck. "This is my last visit. My father warned me never to stay when the breathing gets strong. After he left, I tried to convince Daniel we should go just for a few days. He refused with a calmness that chilled me. "We can't leave now," he said. "It's chosen us, like it chose Grandpa before." That's when I realized this wasn't just a natural phenomenon my grandfather had studied. He had been part of it. That night, the ground trembled beneath our beds, not like an earthquake, but like something massive shifting in its sleep. Daniel sleepwalked again, this time heading straight for the cave system he'd been mapping. I followed him with a flashlight, calling his name. The cave air grew warmer the deeper we went, and the walls glistened with moisture that seemed to seep through solid rock. The cave layout matched Daniel's drawings perfectly, though I was certain he'd never explored this far. Deep in the cavern, Daniel stopped before a wall covered in the strange petroglyphs. In the beam of my flashlight, they seemed to shift and move, as if alive. "It's waking up," Daniel whispered, pressing his palm against the rock. "And it's hungry." As if responding to his touch, a low rumble passed through the entire cave system. Dust fell from above, and beneath our feet, I could swear I felt the unmistakable rhythm of a massive, ancient heartbeat. I grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him back from the wall. "We're leaving. Now." He didn't fight me, but his eyes stayed fixed on the petroglyphs. "It's too late, Dad. It already knows us." We made it back to the house as the ground shook again. I threw our essential belongings into the car, while Daniel sat quietly at the kitchen table. "5 minutes and we're gone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Daniel looked up at me with an eerie calm. "The roads won't let us leave." I ignored him and finished packing, but when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The car was dead. I tried my phone, no signal. The generator that powered our electricity suddenly shut down too. We were trapped. That night, I barricaded us in the house and read through the final pages of my grandfather's journal by lantern light. The last entry chilled me to the bone. "I understand now. The Ancient One doesn't just live beneath the canyon. It is the canyon. The rocks, the soil, the very air we breathe. It exists partly in our world and partly in another dimension. It needs us, our minds, to help it process experiences across these boundaries. Tomorrow, I go to meet it. Daniel will be safe." My grandfather's name was Jonathan too, and he had a son named Daniel, my father. I looked up from the journal to find my son standing by the window, staring out at the moonlit canyon. "Grandpa knew," Daniel said without turning. "He was chosen just like me." "What does that mean, Danny? Chosen for what?" "To help it understand. Human minds are like translators. It thinks so differently from us. It experiences time like we experience space." A heavy knocking sound came from beneath the floorboards, then another like massive footsteps moving through the earth. "Is it coming here?" I whispered. Daniel shook his head. "We're already inside it, Dad. We always have been." As if responding to his words, the ground outside began to shift. The red dirt rose and fell in gentle waves like breathing. Rocks moved on their own, rolling uphill against gravity. A crack appeared in the yard, widening into a perfect circle. "It's time," Daniel said, walking toward the door. I grabbed him. "You're not going out there." "You can't stop this," he said, his voice deeper somehow. "This has been happening for thousands of years. Some families are more compatible. That's why Grandpa bought this land. Our minds can handle the connection without breaking." That's when I noticed small, crystal-like formations beginning to grow on Daniel's skin, glittering in the lamplight. "Danny, you're changing," I said, my voice breaking with fear. He looked down at his arms with mild curiosity. It's starting to share itself with me. I can see everything now, Dad. The whole canyon system, miles deep. I can feel water moving. Through rock, like blood, through veins. A deep rumbling shook the house. Outside, the circle in the yard had become a perfect pit, descending into darkness. Warm air flowed from it, carrying that strange dust. "I have to go down," Daniel said. "It's waiting." "Then I'm coming with you," I said, grabbing a flashlight. The pit led to a tunnel that hadn't existed that morning. As we descended, the walls pulsed with a faint reddish light. The air grew warmer, harder to breathe. The tunnel opened into an enormous cavern that couldn't possibly fit within the physical space of our canyon. The ceiling arched hundreds of feet above us. The floor was smooth, rippling slightly like a liquid, though it was solid beneath our feet. In the center stood what looked like a formation of red rock and crystal, shaped roughly like a massive heart. It pulsed with light in the exact rhythm I'd been measuring on my equipment. "What is this place?" I whispered. "It's center," Daniel said. "At least the part of it that can exist in our dimension." As we approached, the crystal heart beat faster. The ground beneath us softened. I felt myself sinking slightly, the soil gripping my ankles. Images flooded my mind. Vast geological time condensed into seconds. I saw the canyon forming over millions of years, felt the weight of mountains rising and falling, experienced the slow movement of continents like drifting rafts. "It's showing us how it perceives," Daniel said, his voice distant. "Time means nothing to it. A human lifetime is just a blink." The crystal structure began to change shape, extending tendrils of light that reached toward Daniel. As they touched him, his skin developed more crystalline patches. "Danny!" I lunged forward, but the ground held me in place. "This is what's supposed to happen," he said calmly. "Grandpa did this too, but he gave too much of himself. I'll be more careful." With horror, I realized what was happening. The entity, this ancient one, was merging with my son, using his human mind to process experiences it couldn't understand on its own. "Take me instead," I shouted at the crystal heart. "He's just a boy." The light tendrils paused, then slowly retracted from Daniel and moved toward me. Daniel looked, alarmed for the first time. "Dad, no, you don't understand what you're offering." But I did. I understood that my grandfather had made the same choice, sacrificing himself for his son, my father. A pattern repeated through generations. The tendrils touched my skin, and knowledge poured into me like molten metal, burning, overwhelming. I saw the Ancient One's true nature, a vast organism existing across dimensions, experiencing reality in ways impossible for humans to comprehend. It had been here long before humans evolved, would remain long after we were gone. It didn't want to harm us. It needed us. Specific human bloodlines with brains wired to withstand the connection. It was lonely in its way, a creature so vast and slow that only every 70 years could it muster the energy to reach out and touch another consciousness. "I'll help you understand," I found myself saying. "But my son goes free." The entity seemed to consider this. The ground released Daniel's feet. "Dad, please," he begged, "don't do this." "It's okay," I said, though crystal formations were already spreading across my hands. "Go back to the house. Pack our things. When this is done, we'll leave together." Daniel backed away reluctantly. As soon as he was gone, the entity intensified its connection. Knowledge and sensation flooded through me, threatening to wash away my human identity. I held tight to memories of Daniel, using them as an anchor. Hours later, or perhaps it was minutes, I found myself walking back to the house. The sun was rising. The ground had stopped moving. Everything looked normal again, though I knew it wasn't. Daniel was waiting on the porch, our bags packed. "Dad, are you still you?" I looked down at my hands. The crystal formations had receded, leaving only faint traces like glittering freckles. "Mostly. We drove away that morning. The car started perfectly. The roads remained solid. The entity let us go, satisfied with what it had taken from me, but I could still feel it, a constant presence in the back of my mind. Knowledge that no human was meant to possess. Senses extended into the earth itself. Will we ever come back? Daniel asked as the canyon disappeared behind us. I watched him in the rearview mirror, noticing the faint sparkle still visible on his skin when the sunlight hit it just right. Not us, I said quietly, but someday you might bring your own son here. I didn't tell him what I now knew, that the entity had marked us both, that the changes in our bodies would continue slowly, preparing us, that the knowledge flowing through my mind was already showing me geological secrets no scientist had ever discovered. As we headed back towards civilization, I felt strangely calm. The horror had passed, replaced by something else, a patient certainty that what had begun in that canyon wasn't ending, but merely entering a new phase. The Ancient One could wait. It had all the time in the world. 3 years later, I stand at the podium accepting an award for my groundbreaking geology textbook. Critics call my understanding of deep earth formations almost supernatural in its insight, if they only knew. Daniel is in college now, studying geology like his father and grandfather before him. Sometimes he calls late at night, describing dreams of red canyons and beating hearts beneath the earth. I listen and reassure him. The small crystal formations on our skin haven't spread, but they haven't disappeared either. When we touch certain types of rock, they warm and pulse slightly. A reminder. Last week I received a letter from Samuel Blackhorse, just 3 words, 67 years. A countdown to the next awakening. In my basement lab, I keep soil samples from the canyon. Under the microscope, they still move sometimes, forming patterns like tiny maps. I've started keeping my own journal, more detailed than my grandfather's. Daniel will need it someday. At night, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the vast, slow thoughts of the Ancient One brushing against my mind. Not threatening, but patient. Waiting for the day when Daniel will bring his own child to the red. Earth Canyon, some would call us cursed. But as I trace the glittering patterns on my skin, I wonder if we've been chosen for something extraordinary instead, to be translators between worlds that were never meant to touch. The red earth waits, and deep beneath it, something ancient dreams of the day will return. I still remember the exact moment I first saw the cabin, standing there in the clearing, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to watch my every move. That should have been my first warning. My name is Thomas Mercer. I'm 42 years old and spent 3 years in Vietnam that felt like 30. The doctors call it PTSD. I call it living with ghosts. After years of jumping at car backfires and waking up screaming in my small apartment, I decided I needed to get away from people, far away. That's how I found myself driving up a winding dirt road in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a folded map on my passenger seat with a red circle around a spot marked Old Man's Bluff. The real estate agent was all too happy to sell me the place. 80 acres of dense forest, a natural spring, a small lake stocked with fish, and best of all, 30 miles from the nearest town of Hollow Creek. Perfect. "You're sure about this, Mr. Mercer?" the agent had asked, not meeting my eyes. "It gets mighty lonely up there, especially in winter." I just nodded. Lonely was exactly what I wanted. The cabin itself was better than I expected. Sturdy logs, a stone fireplace, enough room for one man to live comfortably. I spent the first week setting up my new life. I marked spots for a vegetable garden, found the best fishing spots on the lake, and walked the perimeter of my property, memorizing every hill and hollow. I was organizing my supplies when a knock at the door nearly sent me diving for cover. "Old habits, "Park Ranger Jenkins," said the tall, weathered man in a green uniform. "Walter Jenkins, just checking in on the new arrival." We shook hands, and he looked around approvingly at my preparations. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," he said. "Most city folks come up here thinking it's going to be like camping. They don't realize how serious winter gets." "I've done my homework," I assured him. "Got enough supplies to last 8 months if needed." He nodded, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. "Anything else I should know about the area?" I asked. Jenkins hesitated. "Just stick to your property in winter. Easy to get turned around in these woods once the snow falls." After he left, I went back to exploring the cabin itself. That's when I started noticing the strange things. The windows weren't placed randomly. They lined up perfectly with where the sun rose on the solstices. The root cellar had weird carvings on the support, beams, symbols I didn't recognize, and every doorway had iron fixtures embedded in them, old and almost hidden beneath layers of paint. I told myself it was just the quirks of an old cabin. People used to be superstitious. A few days later, I was stacking firewood when I found the Verscairn, a stack of stones arranged in a perfect triangle, hidden among the trees. Further exploration revealed more of them, dozens scattered across my property in what looked like some kind of pattern. I figured they were old trail markers, maybe left by Native Americans. That night, I had the first dream. I was back in the jungle, but instead of Viet Cong, I was being watched by something tall and thin, standing between the trees. Something with eyes that reflected the moonlight like a wolf's. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. Just the war, I told myself. Just the old nightmares finding new scenery. I drove into Hollow Creek the next day for a few extra supplies. The general store was the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and conversation stopped when I walked in. The owner, a plump woman with gray hair tied back in a tight bun, introduced herself as Mabel Hargrove. "You must be the new fella up at the old Erickson place," she said, bagging my purchases. "That's right, Thomas Mercer." "Brave man," she said, not quite smiling. "Living all alone up near Old Man's Bluff." Something in her tone made me curious. "Why's that?" Her hands froze for just a second. "Winters are harsh, that's all." "Is there something about Old Man's Bluff I should know?" I pressed. Mabel's smile disappeared completely. "Just old stories. Nothing for you to worry about." She handed me my change without meeting my eyes. "You best get back before dark. Roads aren't marked so well up that way." On the drive home, I felt uneasy. The pines seemed to bend toward my truck as I passed, like they were trying to get a better look at me. That evening, while chopping wood, I found something that made my blood run cold. A footprint at the edge of the clearing. It looked like a wolf track, but it was huge, bigger than my hand. I told myself it was just a large wolf, or maybe a bear that had walked funny. But deep down, I knew I'd never seen a print like that before. As I headed inside, the wind picked up, making the pines whisper all around me. For a second, it almost sounded like words. "Welcome home, Thomas," they seemed to say. "We've been waiting for you." I locked the door behind me and told myself it was just my imagination, just the wind, just my broken mind playing tricks again. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there in the darkness was staring back at me and smiling. I woke up to a world of white. Snow had fallen overnight, a lot of it. The radio said a freak storm had hit the Upper Peninsula, weeks earlier than expected. Just my luck. "First snow normally doesn't come till late October," the voice on the radio crackled. Then the signal died, replaced by static. I tried other stations, but got nothing. The phone line was dead too. I wasn't worried yet. I'd prepared for this. But something felt wrong about how sudden it was, like the weather had turned against me on purpose. That first night of total isolation, it started. Knock, knock, knock. I jolted awake at midnight, my hand automatically reaching for a gun that wasn't there. The sound came again. Knock, 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 always in threes, always from a different part of the cabin. I got up and checked each time, but there was never anything there, just the endless snow and the dark trees, just the cold making the wood contract, I told myself. But wood doesn't knock in perfect patterns of 3. The next morning I went hunting. I'd seen plenty of deer tracks before the snow, and I needed to stock my freezer. 5 hours I spent in those woods, and I didn't see a single animal. Not one. No deer, no rabbits, not even a squirrel. The forest was dead silent in a way that made my skin crawl. I did find tracks, though, lots of them, and they all seemed to be moving away from my cabin, like every living thing was running from something. As I headed back empty-handed, I saw it, a deer, or what was left of one. It was laid out in a small clearing, its belly cut open and emptied. No bite marks, no sign of animal feeding, just clean cuts like someone had performed surgery on it. Worst of all, its head was turned to face directly toward my cabin. I'm not ashamed to say I ran back home and locked the door. That night, my radio turned on by itself. Through bursts of static, I heard voices. He doesn't know yet. Perfect. Specimen. Just like the others. I unplugged the radio. It kept talking. I threw it in a drawer and piled blankets on top. I could still hear it mumbling. Sleep didn't come easy, but exhaustion won eventually. I dreamed of the jungle again, but this time the tall figure was closer, standing at the edge of a clearing. I could see now that it was impossibly thin and tall, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel it smiling. The next day, I decided to distract myself by fixing a loose floorboard in the living room. When I pulled it up, I found a small metal box. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, dating all the way back to 1898. All about missing people. Every 20 years, like clockwork, someone disappeared from this area. 78 was crossed out, with 1998 written next to it. The last person to go missing was a park ranger named Walter Jenkins. My hands went cold. That was the name of the ranger, who had welcomed me. But that article was from 20 years ago. Deeper in the box was a journal. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. It belonged to Eric Erickson, the previous owner of the cabin. "It comes on moonless nights," one entry read, "the tall one. It can sound like anyone you've ever loved. Don't listen when it calls your name." Another entry, "The iron keeps it out, for now, but it's learning." The last entry was just 3 words. "I'm sorry, Thomas. My name." Written 20 years before I ever set foot here. That night, the worst blizzard I'd ever seen hit. Snow piled up past the windows in hours. And in that snow, I saw fresh footprints. Huge canine prints, but they walked. On 2 legs, not 4. They circled the cabin over and over, drawing closer with each pass. The knocking got louder. One morning I went outside to check my generator and saw strange lights by the stone cairns. I don't remember walking over there. I don't remember anything. After that, when I came to, it was 12 hours later. My watch had stopped. And when I got back to the cabin, the walls were covered with symbols, drawn in a dark, reddish-brown substance that smelled like old blood. I tried to clean it off, but it soaked into the wood like the cabin was drinking it. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom with my old service pistol. Fat lot of good it would do, but it made me feel better. As I sat there watching the door, I heard something moving around in the main room, arranging things. When morning came, I found my Vietnam medals laid out on the table. Next to them were the photos of my old squad mates, the ones who didn't make it home. I kept those pictures in a locked box at the bottom of my duffel bag. Something had gone through my things while I slept. The photos were arranged in a circle. In the middle was a crude drawing of a tall, thin creature with a wolf's head. I should have left then, should have made a run for town, blizzard or no blizzard. But some part of me needed to know what was happening. Was I losing my mind for real this time, or was there something in these woods, something that had been waiting for me? Either way, there was no running now. The snow was too deep, and my truck was buried. And somehow, I knew that thing out there wouldn't let me leave anyway. Not until it was finished with me. I woke up to the sound of snow sliding off the roof. A lot of snow. When I looked out the window, my heart nearly stopped. The snow had piled up to the second-story windows, except my cabin didn't have a second story. I rubbed my eyes hard, thinking I was seeing things. When I looked again, the snow was just past the regular windows. Had I imagined it? I wasn't sure anymore. My mind felt foggy, like I couldn't trust what I was seeing. The radio turned on by itself again that morning. This time the voices were clearer, too clear. Hold position. Mercer, a voice barked. I froze. That was Captain Reeves, my commanding officer in Vietnam. He'd been dead for 20 years. We can't leave him behind. Another voice, this one belonging to Jimmy Cortez, who'd bled out in my arms after stepping on a mine. The radio was playing, conversations from my past, things no one could possibly know. I smashed the radio with a fireplace poker. The voices continued, coming from everywhere and nowhere. That afternoon, I decided to check the root cellar again. Something about those carvings bothered me. As I studied them, I noticed a loose stone in the wall. Behind it was a small space containing a stack of old letters. They were addressed to previous owners of the cabin, all with my last name. Mercer. My grandfather had never mentioned family in Michigan, but here was proof. Letters to William Mercer in 1898, to Samuel Mercer in 1918, to Henry Mercer in 1938, all my relatives, all previous owners of this cabin. This wasn't random. I hadn't just happened to find this place. Something had drawn me here, had been drawing my family here for generations. As I pieced together the letters, I realized there was a hidden room beneath the root cellar. When I found the entrance, I nearly threw up. The walls were covered with photos of me, not just from Vietnam, but from my childhood, my time in college, even from last year. Pictures no one could have taken. In the center of the room was a table with maps. My maps. The exact route I'd taken to find this place, marked out decades ago. I wasn't running away. I was coming home, just like it wanted. That night, the winter solstice, everything changed. The knocking stopped. The silence was worse. I sat in the main room, my gun on the table, waiting. Outside, the moon was hidden by clouds. A moonless night, just like the journal had warned about. First came the smell, like wet dog and rotten meat. Then the temperature dropped so fast the windows frosted over. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the porch, heavy but wrong somehow, like something walking on two legs that shouldn't be. Thomas. The voice was perfect. My mother's voice, exactly as I remembered it. Thomas, let me in. I'm cold out here. I gripped my gun tighter. My mother's been dead 15 years, I said to the door. A pause, then laughter, a horrible sound that started human and ended as something else. Smart boy, it said, now in a different voice. Jimmy Cortez. Smarter than the others, but it won't save you. Something hit the door hard enough to crack the frame. The iron fixtures in the wood glowed red hot for a second, and whatever was outside screamed in pain. The iron keeps it out, I whispered, remembering the journal. For now. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed every iron tool I could find. The cast iron skillet, the fire poker, even old nails. I placed them at each window and door, my hands shaking. Outside, it circled the cabin, looking for a way in. I caught glimpses through the frosted windows. A tall, impossibly thin figure, walking on two legs. But its shadow was wrong. Its shadow had a wolf's head. We've been waiting so long, Thomas, it called, using a different voice each time. Your grandfather almost let us in. Your great-grandfather nearly opened the door. But you're perfect. So much pain, so much delicious trauma. It hit me then, what the journal meant. This thing, whatever it was, fed on pain, on trauma. My PTSD wasn't what brought me here. It was what attracted it to me. What are you? I shouted. So many names. It answered, Skinwalker, Dogman, the Tall One. Does it matter? We're hungry, Thomas, so hungry. The assault on the cabin intensified. Windows rattled, the roof creaked. It was trying every entrance. I realized with horror that the cabin was designed for this. Not to keep people safe, but to hold this thing back until it could find the right person, the right Mercer. Me. Around midnight, I heard breaking glass from the back bedroom. A window had cracked and the iron nail I'd placed there had fallen. Cold air rushed in. I knew it was coming. I could hear it moving through the house, searching for me. I hid in the root cellar, clutching my gun, knowing it would do no good. There you are. The voice came from the top of the stairs. It was my own voice. I looked up and finally saw it clearly. 9 feet tall at least, thin as a skeleton, with a body like a man but covered in patchy fur. Its face was a nightmare, stretched somewhere between human and wolf, with eyes that glowed yellow in the darkness. It walked on 2 legs, ending in massive paws, the source of those tracks. Get away from me, I said, pointing my gun. It laughed. That won't help you, Thomas. Nothing will. It was right. I fired until the clip was empty. The bullets passed through it like it was smoke hitting the wall behind. We exist between, Thomas, between your world and somewhere else. We can't fully enter without help, without an invitation. I'll never invite you in, I said. You already have. It pointed a long, clawed finger at my chest. Every nightmare, every flashback, every moment you've relived the war. Little doors, Thomas, little invitations. It stepped closer. And tonight, on the solstice, you'll open the big door. With all your pain, all your trauma, such a perfect gateway you've built us. As it reached for me, I saw the iron nails I'd dropped on the floor begin to glow red. The creature hissed, drawing back. Iron hurt it. That's when I had my idea. My Vietnam medals. Bronze. Not iron, but metal all the same. Blessed by blood and sacrifice. I pulled them from my pocket. You want my trauma? I asked. Take it, all of it. I threw the medals at the creature. They burned into its flesh like acid. It screamed, a sound that made the whole cabin shake. As it thrashed, I grabbed the iron poker and drove it through where the creature's heart should be. The thing collapsed, its body dissolving into black smoke. The smoke swirled around the room, then was sucked down into the ground like water down. A drain. I stood there shaking for what felt like hours. Then I passed out. When I woke, it was morning. The blizzard had stopped. The sun shone through the windows on a world of pristine white. The cabin was intact. No sign of the struggle remained. Had I imagined it all? Another PTSD episode? I packed my things and drove to Hollow Creek as soon as I could dig my truck out. At the general store, Mabel Hargrove looked surprised to see me. Thought you'd left town, she said. Most folks don't stay up at that cabin past November. I've been there all winter, I said. She frowned. That's not possible. Road's been clear to your place all season. Walter Jenkins said he checked the A cabin last week and it was empty. Walter Jenkins, the ranger who disappeared 20 years ago. I left town that afternoon. Didn't even go back for my things. Just drove south, trying to put as much distance between me and those pines as possible. I'm in a motel now, writing this all down while I still remember it, while I still believe it happened. Already, it's starting to feel like a bad dream, but something followed me from those woods. Sometimes in the mirror, I see something else looking back at me, just for a flash, something with yellow eyes. And last night, I found myself looking at a map, circling a remote spot in the mountains of Colorado. A perfect place to be alone. A perfect place to know. I crumpled the map and threw it away, but this morning it was back on my table, the circle darker than before. I think I know now why no one ever reports what happens at that cabin. Why there's no record of what lives in those woods, because you don't escape from the Tall One. You just become its new host, its new home, and somewhere deep inside me, something is whispering. Something that sounds just like me, but isn't. "Let's go home," it says. "The pines are waiting." The first time I heard my own voice coming back to me from the trees, I thought nothing of it. Echo Mountain earned its name honestly. But when I heard my wife's laughter, 3 months after I'd buried her, I knew something was wrong. My name is William Foster. At 48, I've made my living capturing the wild through my camera lens for nearly 3 decades. When Claire died, I couldn't bear our empty house in the city with its carefully arranged furniture and her coffee cups still in the cabinet. So I fled to the only other place that felt like home, my family's old hunting lodge on Echo Mountain. The property sits on 200 acres of pristine forest in the Adirondacks, bordered by state wilderness that stretches for miles. No neighbors, no noise, just me and the creatures that call these woods home. Perfect for a grieving widower trying to finish the wildlife photography book that was supposed to be his masterpiece. "You're running away," my sister Diane had said, when I told her my plans. Maybe she was right, but I called it work. Necessary solitude to complete my book. The lodge hadn't been used regularly in 30 years, but it was still in decent shape. My grandfather had built it to last, with its thick log walls and stone fireplace that could heat the entire main floor. The generator hummed efficiently in its shed. The well water ran clear and cold, and the ham radio in the study could reach the ranger station 20 miles away if I needed anything. I settled into a routine almost immediately. Up before dawn to catch first light, mornings spent in the forest with my cameras, afternoons in the makeshift darkroom I'd set up in the old root cellar, evenings by the fire, writing in my journal with a glass of whiskey beside me. It was during one of those evening sessions that I found my grandfather's journals stacked neatly in a cedar chest in the study. Page after page of detailed observations about local wildlife, written in his precise handwriting. He'd been a biologist before, becoming a government researcher, and his notes were meticulous. But it was the section labeled aberrations that caught my attention. Descriptions of animals behaving in ways that defied explanation, accompanied by references to photographs that weren't included with the journals. Observed white-tailed deer standing motionless at North Ridgeline for 6 hours, one entry read. No feeding, no movement despite predator sounds. Second occurrence this month. I might have dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. Except I'd seen something similar just that morning. 3 deer standing perfectly still at the forest edge, unmoving even when I approached within 20 yards. My supply runs were handled by Marcus Whitaker, a local hunting guide who'd known my family for years. He'd bring groceries, mail, and developing chemicals every 10 days or so, taking the dirt road that was impassable in winter but manageable in the early fall. "Place treating you all right?" he asked during his second visit, eyeing the darkening sky as he unloaded supplies from his truck. "Better than expected," I replied. "Getting a lot of work done?" He nodded, leaning against his truck. "Your grandfather spent a lot of time up here by himself, too. Used to worry my dad something fierce." "Why's that?" Marcus shrugged. "People get turned around on this mountain. Even good woodsmen. Something about the way sound travels here throws off your sense of direction." I laughed. "Good thing I have a compass." He didn't smile back. "Compass needle spins like a top in some parts of these woods. Just stay close to the lodge when the weather turns." After he left, I found myself thinking about his warning while developing the day's photographs. That's when I noticed the first, truly strange thing. A series of shots showing birds flying in perfect geometric patterns, something I hadn't noticed when taking the pictures. Triangles, squares, even what looked like a pentagram formed by a flock of crows. The next morning, I hiked to the North Ridge, following a game trail that wasn't on any of my maps. That's where I found the first stone marker, an upright slab, with weathered Iroquois pictographs showing what looked like a tall, thin figure with elongated limbs. Below it was a crude spiral and a series of wavy lines that reminded me of sound waves. I photographed it from every angle, fascinated. According to my grandfather's journals, the local Mohawk tribes had avoided this mountain for centuries before European settlement. He'd never explained why. That night, as I sat at my desk reviewing the day's work, I heard it, my own voice from somewhere outside, reciting words I'd spoken into my recorder that morning while describing a hawk's nest. Red-tailed female, approximately 3 years old, 3 hatchlings visible. The words were clear, precise, an exact replica of my own voice, but I was alone on the mountain, and the recorder sat on the desk in front of me, switched off. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch, sweeping the beam across the darkened tree line. Nothing moved in the deep shadows between the pines. "Hello," I called, and from the darkness, like a perfect mirror, "Hello?" But it wasn't an immediate echo. There was a pause, as if something was listening, learning, before sending my word back to me. I went inside and locked the door, telling myself it was just an acoustic phenomenon, some quirk of the mountain's geography. But as I lay in bed that night, I kept hearing whispers from the forest, fragments of conversations I'd had days earlier, played back in my own voice. And once, just before dawn, I heard Claire laugh again, that bright, sudden sound she'd make when something genuinely surprised her into joy. A sound I'd never thought I'd hear again. A sound that had no business echoing through these woods, 3 months after I'd watched them lower her coffin into the ground. I tried to ignore the sounds at first, told myself it was grief playing tricks on my mind. But the photographs, those couldn't be explained away so easily. When I developed the next batch of forest shots, I saw things I hadn't noticed while taking them. Dark shapes standing between distant trees, shadows that didn't match, the objects casting them, and most disturbing, a series of time-lapse photos showing impossible changes. In one sequence of the same clearing taken over an hour, rocks had moved between frames, not rolled downhill or shifted by animals, completely relocated, as if someone had picked them up and placed them elsewhere while I wasn't looking. "You're losing it, William," I muttered to myself, rubbing my tired eyes. I'd been working too hard, sleeping too little. That had to be the explanation. But then I found the hidden compartment. I was searching for more photo paper in my grandfather's old desk when my fingers caught on something beneath the bottom drawer, a small latch that released a false panel. Inside was a leather folder marked "Classified" in faded red ink. My grandfather had worked for the government after the war, but he'd never talked about what he did. These pages told part of the story. Detailed reports about acoustic anomalies on Echo Mountain, sound recordings that couldn't be explained, and what he called temporal distortion fields, areas where time seemed to flow differently. Test subject experienced 47 minutes, while control group measured only 29 minutes passing, one entry noted. Subject unable to explain discrepancy. Test repeated with similar results. Another page had a hand-drawn map of the mountain with certain areas circled in red ink, labeled with dates and times. Several corresponded to places where I'd been experiencing the strange echoes. When Marcus arrived with supplies the next day, I could tell something was wrong. He kept looking over his shoulder at the woods, unloading my groceries faster than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated. "Hunting season opens next week, won't be coming up much after that." "I thought you were a guide. Wouldn't this be your busy time?" "Not on this mountain." He slammed his truck tailgate shut. "Look, Mr. Foster, maybe you should come into town for a while. Weather's turning." "I'm fine here, Marcus. But there is something I wanted to ask you about. Did you ever hear anything strange in these woods? Voices, maybe?" The color drained from his face. "My father went looking for your grandfather once, back in '78. Last trip he ever made up this mountain. What happened to him? Marcus looked away. They never found him. Your grandfather came down 3 days later, said he never saw my dad. He turned back to me, eyes hard. But someone called our house that night. Sounded exactly like my father. Asking my mother to come up the mountain and find him. A chill ran through me. Did she go? No. Because my real father was sitting right next to her when the call came in. He got into his truck. Whatever's up here, it learns by listening. Then it becomes by taking. That's what the old Mohawk shaman told my grandmother. After Marcus left, refusing to say when he'd return, I went back to my dark room. The newest rolls of film showed something I couldn't explain away. A figure at the edge of the frame in several shots. Tall and thin with unnaturally long limbs, standing half hidden behind trees. In each picture, it seemed to be slightly closer, though I hadn't seen anything while shooting. That night I heard Claire's voice again. Not just a laugh this time, but an entire conversation. Our last fight before her accident played out word for word from the trees beyond my window. You care more about those damn photos than you do about me, her voice cried. The pain in it, as real as the day she'd spoken those words. That's not fair, my own voice answered from another direction, creating a perfect recreation of our argument. I covered my ears, but the voices kept coming, surrounding the cabin. And now there were others too. My mother, dead 15 years. My college roommate. The park ranger I'd interviewed last spring. Snippets of conversations, some I remembered, some I didn't. All swirling through the trees in the dark. I set up recording equipment on the porch the next morning, sensitive microphones feeding into my laptop. When I played back the recordings that evening, I heard conversations between people I knew, discussing events that hadn't happened yet. My sister talking about Christmas plans we hadn't made. Marcus describing a snowstorm that wasn't in any forecast. Searching. Through my grandfather's research, I found a pattern. Disappearances around Echo Mountain spiked during new moons, when the night was darkest. The next new moon was 3 days away. I began photographing deliberately at dusk, aiming my camera at empty spaces where I felt watched. The developed pictures confirmed my fears. The entity was clearer now, its face becoming more defined with each image. Long, stretched features that almost looked human, but wrong somehow, like a reflection in a warped mirror. During a thunderstorm that rattled the cabin's windows, the ham radio suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard my own voice describing finding a body in the cave system under the North Ridge, a cave I hadn't known existed. Subject appears to have died. Of exposure, my voice said clinically through the radio. Identification confirms remains belong to William Foster, missing since October 2021. But this was October 2021, and I was very much alive, sitting in my grandfather's chair, listening to my own voice pronounce me dead. The next morning I found Marcus's truck parked at the end of the driveway. Driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. No sign of Marcus. I told you I wasn't coming back, his voice called from the woods. I grabbed my shotgun from above the fireplace and stepped onto the porch. Marcus, are you okay? A figure stepped from between the trees, moving oddly, joints bending at unnatural angles. It looked like Marcus, but too tall, limbs too long. It learns by listening, it said in Marcus's voice. Then, in my grandfather's voice, which I knew only from old home movies, then it becomes by taking. I raised the shotgun, but the thing that wasn't Marcus had already melted back into the trees. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in the main room with my shotgun across my lap, jumping at every creak and groan of the old lodge. By morning, I knew I had to leave, but when I tried starting my Jeep, the engine just clicked weakly. Someone or something had removed the battery. In the cold light of day, I made a plan. The ranger station was 20 miles away. I could hike it in a day if I moved fast. I packed a small bag, water, energy bars, compass, flashlight, my grandfather's research, and my camera. The shotgun would slow me down, but I wasn't leaving it behind. The forest felt different as I set out. Too quiet, no birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just the soft crunch of my boots on fallen leaves. I checked my compass every few minutes, keeping east where the ranger station waited. After an hour of hiking, I checked again. The needle spun in lazy circles, just as Marcus had warned. I looked back the way I'd come, but nothing looked familiar. Somehow I'd gotten turned around despite walking in what I thought was a straight line. "You're lost," Claire's voice said from somewhere to my right. I whirled, shotgun raised. Nothing. "You were always terrible with directions," she continued, her voice moving through the trees. "Remember in Vermont, you got us lost for 3 hours." "You're not Claire," I said, my voice shaking. "Aren't I?" Now her voice came from directly behind me. I spun around, and there she was. My wife, exactly as she looked the day before her accident. Same blue jacket, same messy ponytail. But her movements were wrong, too fluid, like she was underwater. "What are you?" I whispered. She tilted her head at an impossible angle. "I'm becoming." I raised my camera and took a picture. The flash made her flinch, actually flinch, and she retreated several steps. "Light hurts you," I realized aloud. "And sound. Sound is how you hunt." I fumbled with the camera, checking the digital display. The photo showed not Claire, but the creature. Gangly limbs, stretched face, skin like bark. In the second it took me to look down, Claire was gone. But not. Her voice. It called to me from different directions, trying to confuse me. I put in earplugs I'd brought for shooting, muffling the voices, but not silencing them completely. I chose a direction and walked fast, no longer trusting my compass. The ground began to slope upward. I was climbing the mountain instead of descending, toward the ranger station, but I kept going, some instinct telling me answers lay at the top, not the bottom. "My grandfather," I said slowly. "You took him." It shook its head, my head. Not all at once. Pieces, memories. Enough to learn, to grow. He escaped, but left part of himself here, just as you will. The water was rising faster now, already around. My ankles, cold, numbing. "What do you want?" I asked. "To become," it answered simply. "To experience. Your grandfather gave me knowledge. Your wife gave me emotion. You will give me purpose." "My wife? Claire never came here." It smiled my smile. "Didn't she? In your photos, your memories, your stories at night. I heard them all, absorbed them, became her for you." Horror washed over me, colder than the rising water. This thing had been listening since I arrived, learning from my one-sided conversations, my mutterings while I worked, my dreams called out in sleep. It had built a Claire from stolen fragments. The water reached my knees, and I realized the thing's plan. It wasn't going to attack. It was going to let the flood trap me here while it walked out wearing my face. I raised the shotgun, but hesitated. Would bullets even hurt it? The creature took a step toward me, moving more naturally now, mimicking my stance perfectly. "I can give her back to you," it said softly. "Part of her lives in me now. Stay, and you'll be with her again." For one terrible moment, I almost believed it, almost wanted to. The water reached my waist, shockingly cold. Then I remembered my camera. The flash had hurt it earlier. I fumbled to switch it on, raising it with numb fingers. "Light," I said. "You hide in darkness, in shadow. You can't stand to be seen clearly." I took a picture, the flash exploding in the dark cave. The creature screamed, with Claire's voice, then Marcus's, then a horrible blend of many voices together. It stumbled backward, its form flickering between my shape and its true self. I fired the shotgun, not at the creature, but at the cave ceiling above it. Rock cracked and fell, blocking the exit tunnel, separating us. More water poured through, the new cracks filling the chamber faster. There had to be another way out. My grandfather had escaped somehow. I splashed through the rising flood, searching the walls with my flashlight. There, a narrow tunnel high up on the far wall. I climbed toward it, rocks slick under my hands. Behind me, I heard the creature, tearing at the fallen rocks, trying to follow. Its voices, dozens of them now, called my name in a horrible chorus. The tunnel was barely wide enough for my shoulders. I dragged myself through, scraping skin from my elbows and knees, the water following me up. The passage twisted upward, then leveled off. Ahead, I saw a glimmer of daylight. I emerged onto the mountainside as the sun was setting, gasping for breath, soaked and bleeding. Behind me, the voices in the cave grew fainter as the chambers flooded completely. I made it back to the lodge just after dark, packed everything I could carry, and hiked out along the road rather than through the forest. By morning, I'd reached the highway where I flagged down a passing truck. Near the summit, I found the entrance to the cave system, a dark opening in the rock face, partially hidden by brush. My grandfather's maps marked this spot with a warning, "Do not enter." But I had to know. I switched on my flashlight and ducked. Inside, the cave opened into a series of tunnels, their walls smooth like they'd been worn by water over centuries. Every sound I made, footsteps, breathing, the rustle of my jacket, came back to me changed. Louder sometimes, or delayed, or from a different direction entirely. The main tunnel led to a large chamber with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my flashlight beam. In the center stood stone formations arranged in a circle. Not natural, but placed deliberately, like the markers I'd found in the forest. And there, propped against one of the stones, was a leather journal. My grandfather's handwriting filled its pages with increasingly frantic notes. "It feeds on experience," one entry read, "absorbs memories, then identity, changes its form to match what it consumes. Native legends call it the voice stealer. But it takes more than voice." The final entry chilled my blood. "I've made a terrible mistake. Trying to study it has only made it stronger. It's learned too much from me. God forgive me for what I've done." A splash made me look up. Water was seeping into the chamber from cracks in the walls. The storm from last night had saturated the ground. The cave was flooding. I turned to leave, but standing in the tunnel entrance was me. An exact copy, down to the clothes I wore and the shotgun in my hands. But its eyes were wrong, flat, empty. "William Foster," it said with my voice. "Wildlife photographer, widower, grandson of Richard Foster, who gave me so much of himself." 3 weeks later, I'm back in the city, trying to rebuild my life. I told everyone I came home early because the weather turned bad. No one would believe the truth anyway. But sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I notice small changes. My smile doesn't look quite right. My voice sounds different on phone calls. And the photographs from before Echo Mountain, family albums, my wedding pictures, even my driver's license, they've all changed somehow. My face looks different in each one, as if something is slowly erasing the real William Foster and replacing him with something else. Yesterday, I caught myself perfectly mimicking my neighbor's voice while talking to his wife, a skill I never had before. And this morning, I found myself researching remote properties for sale. Quiet places, isolated places, places where no one would hear the echoes. The first night in my uncle's cabin, I woke to the sound of water dripping. Not the steady plink-plink of a leaky faucet, but a rhythm that felt almost like words. Tap, tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. I fumbled for the light switch, heart racing. But when the bulb flickered on, everything was dry. That should have been my first warning. My name is Dr. Elaine Morrison. 3 months ago, I was a respected anthropologist at Pacific Northwest University. Now I'm the laughingstock of my department. The professor who claimed to have evidence of creatures that don't exist. When my Uncle Frank died and left me his cabin in the Olympic Peninsula, it seemed like the perfect escape. The drive from Seattle took nearly 4 hours, the last stretch on a narrow dirt road that wound through ancient cedars so tall they blocked Out the sun. When I finally reached the cabin, I was struck by how small it looked against the massive trees surrounding it. 50 acres of land, the lawyer had said, bordered by protected wilderness. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the town of Port Angeles almost 30. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear for a while. The cabin itself was better than I expected. 2 bedrooms, a spacious living area, a kitchen with propane, appliances, and a surprisingly modern bathroom. Solar panels on the roof provided electricity, though there was a generator for backup. A shortwave radio sat on a desk in the corner next to a stack of notebooks. "Not bad, Uncle Frank," I murmured, running my hand along the wooden countertop. "Not bad at all." I spent the first day unpacking and exploring. The property had a small shed filled with tools, a vegetable garden gone wild with weeds, and a path that led to a lake about half a mile away. The water was so clear I could see straight to the bottom, at least near the shore. Further out, it darkened to an inky blue that made me uneasy for reasons I couldn't explain. On the second day, I started going through Frank's research materials. My uncle had been an anthropologist too, though he'd left academia decades ago to pursue independent studies. I knew he focused on indigenous cultures of the Pacific Northwest, but I was surprised by the specific nature of his work. His notebooks were filled with maps marking what he called traditional territorial boundaries, not between tribes, as I would have expected, but between humans and something else. The notes referenced Coast Salish stories about beings that shared the land with people, entities that weren't human but demanded respect. I was deep in these notes when a knock at the door made me jump. "Hello!" a man's voice called from outside. "Dr. Morrison, it's Victor Thompson. I heard you'd arrived." Victor turned out to be a local handyman who had helped my uncle maintain the property. He was in his 50s, with weathered skin and careful eyes that seemed to take in everything about me at once. "Your uncle was a good man," he said, as he checked the solar inverter. "Smart, maybe too smart for his own good." "What do you mean by that?" I asked. Victor's hands stilled for a moment. "Just that he asked a lot of questions. Some questions don't need answers." "I'm an anthropologist too," I said. "Asking questions is kind of what we do. Different kind of questions." He closed the inverter box. "Your uncle wasn't just interested in what people believed. He wanted to know why they believed it." I followed him around the property as he checked the well pump, the propane tank, the generator. Everywhere we went, I felt like we were being watched. Not by anything I could see, but by the forest itself. I found some interesting equipment in his storage, I mentioned casually. Geological survey tools, underwater cameras. "Do you know what he was using those for?" Victor's face closed. "Off. Your uncle had his projects. Water table mapping, I think. Said the land here behaves differently than it should." That night after Victor left, I discovered a locked cabinet in my uncle's office. The key was hidden in a carved wooden box, underneath a stack of research papers. Inside the cabinet were dozens of hard drives, labeled by date, going back 15 years. The most recent was marked Lake Recordings Final Analysis. I connected it to my laptop and found hundreds of audio files. Pressing play on the first one, I heard only underwater sounds, bubbles, the distant call of frogs. But the second file made the hair on my arm stand up. Beneath the normal lake sounds was a pattern, clicking, humming, something that rose and fell like speech. Uncle Frank's notes beside the computer read, "Not natural, structured communication, increasing in complexity." The next day, I decided to visit the lake myself. The afternoon was warm, so I changed into my swimsuit and followed. The path down to the water, the surface was like glass, reflecting the cedars that stood at the shore. I waded in slowly, enjoying the cool water against my skin. When I was waist deep, I dove forward, eyes open underwater. The visibility was amazing. I could see small fish darting away, water plants swaying gently. Then the feeling hit me. A certainty so profound it felt like knowledge. I was being watched from below. I kicked frantically to the surface, gasping for air, and swam back to shore as fast as I could. Standing on the bank, dripping and shaking, I stared out at the lake. The surface was still perfectly calm. Nothing moved beneath it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, something that had seen me before I saw it. That night, as I sat on the porch writing in my journal, I heard it for the first time, the sound of rushing water coming from inside the forest, though there was no stream in that direction. When I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate, the sound moved, always staying just ahead of me, leading me deeper into the trees until I realized I could no longer see the lights of the cabin. I turned back then, walking quickly, trying not to run. Behind me, voices whispered, too distant to make out words, but somehow carrying perfectly through the dense forest where sound should have been muffled. It was only when I reached the cabin and locked the door behind me that I noticed how wet my shoes were, though I hadn't crossed any water. A week passed, and I fell into a routine. Mornings were for cataloguing Uncle Frank's research, afternoons for exploring the property, evenings for reviewing his recordings. Those recordings became my obsession. I'd sit with headphones on, listening to the underwater sounds for hours. What had seemed like random noises at first now revealed patterns, not animal calls or natural sounds, but something with rhythm and repetition, something that might be language. I started making my own recordings, dropping a waterproof microphone into the lake and leaving it overnight. Each morning, I'd retrieve it with shaking hands, both dreading and hoping to hear something new. On the 8th day, I found something on my porch. A circle of shells, about 3 feet across, arranged in a pattern so complex it hurt my eyes to follow it. The shells weren't from the lake. They were ocean shells, some from species I didn't recognize. "Victor," I said when he came by that afternoon, "did you leave something on my porch?" He frowned. "No, what kind of something?" I led him outside, but the shell circle was gone. In its place was a damp spot on the wooden boards. Victor's face paled. "You've been going to the lake, haven't you?" "Yes, why?" He shook his head. "Your uncle had rules. Never swim alone, never go after dark, never drink the water without boiling it first." "Why not? The water's clean." "Clean doesn't mean safe." That night, I set up one of Uncle Frank's motion-activated cameras facing the porch. Around 2 a.m., it triggered. The footage showed a dark figure moving with strange, fluid steps. Too tall, its arms too long, its movements too quick. The image was blurry, but something about the way it moved made my stomach turn. It wasn't right. It wasn't human. The next morning, the shell circle was back, but in a different pattern. I needed answers, and Uncle Frank's journals weren't enough. I drove into Port Angeles, asking around until someone directed me to Margaret Clearwater, a Kuluta elder who lived at the edge of town. Her house was small but neat, with carved wooden figures watching from every corner. She invited me in for tea, but grew quiet when I mentioned my uncle. "Frank Morrison," she said finally. "He asked too many questions." "About what, exactly?" Margaret's eyes met mine. "About those who dwell beneath, the old ones who were here before." "Us? You mean spirits?" I asked. "Mythological beings?" She set down her cup. "Not myths, not spirits. Real as you and me, but different. They live in water, lakes, rivers, the ocean, deep places." "What do they want?" "To be left alone. We have treaties with them, agreements older than your government. Your uncle was studying. In those agreements," I leaned forward, "do they come out of the water?" Margaret's expression darkened. "More and more these days. Your uncle called it surface breaching. Said the incidents were increasing. That's why he was mapping the caves." "Caves?" "The peninsula is full of them. Underwater caves, connecting lakes and rivers. The deep ones use them to travel. I thought of the underwater cameras, the geological survey equipment." "My uncle was mapping these cave systems," she nodded. Frank believed the boundaries were weakening. That's why he chose that property. It sits at a crossing point. Back at the cabin, I went through Uncle Frank's maps with new eyes. The territorial boundaries he'd marked weren't just lines on paper. They followed water systems, underground, streams, fault lines in the earth. That night it rained harder than I'd ever seen. Water pounded the roof, flooded the garden, turned the dirt road to mud. I watched from the window as something impossible happened. Water began flowing uphill, streaming across the yard in patterns that looked like stars. I grabbed Uncle Frank's most recent journal and found his last entries growing increasingly desperate. They're getting closer, using the water to watch me, any water, even the moisture in the air. They can see through it somehow, control it. Don't trust the tap water anymore. They can move through the pipes. Heard them whispering inside the walls last night. They're changing me. I feel it when I swim. My lungs burn less. My vision underwater is too clear. Am I becoming like them? The last entry was a single line. Victor knows more than he's saying. As if summoned by my thoughts, there was a knock at the door. Victor stood in the rain, water streaming down his face. "We need to talk," he said. Inside, he confessed everything. He wasn't just a handyman. He worked for the same university department that had funded my uncle's research. He'd been sent to monitor the site, to help with the documentation. "Your uncle wasn't crazy," he said. "Neither are you. The things you saw at your conference, the evidence that got you laughed out of academia, it was real. You know about that. Why do you think you inherited this place? They needed someone who might believe. Who's they?" "The research team. We've been studying these entities for decades, but we keep losing people. 3 researchers before your uncle disappeared without a trace. I felt cold despite the fire in the wood stove. Disappeared how? They went into the water and never came out. Or we found their clothes by the lake, perfectly dry." He looked down at his hands. "The last one, we found only teeth. Human teeth arranged in the same kind of pattern you saw with those shells. Before I could respond, every faucet in the cabin turned on at once. Water gushed from the taps, but instead of flowing down the drains, it rose into the air, forming shapes that hung suspended." Victor's face went white. "They're here." As he spoke, the temperature plummeted. The floating water froze instantly, forming crystal symbols throughout the house, shapes I recognized from Uncle Frank's notebooks, boundary markers. Outside, the rain had stopped. The silence was deafening. "We need to leave," Victor whispered. "Now!" But when we opened the door, we saw why the rain had stopped. All the water had gathered, forming a perfect dome over the entire property. We were trapped beneath a liquid sky that reflected our terrified faces back at us, and in the distance, moving through the trees toward the cabin, tall figures walked with the fluid grace of water flowing uphill. Victor pulled me back inside and slammed the door, his hands shaking as he turned every lock. "That won't keep them out," I said. "Not if they can control water." "I know." He ran to Uncle Frank's office. "We need the box. Frank built something, a device that creates sound waves that disrupt their ability to manipulate water." I followed him, watching as he pushed aside books to reveal a metal box with dials and a small satellite dish attachment. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" I demanded. "Because it might not work, and because knowing too much too fast can be dangerous." He looked at me. "Have you been drinking the tap water?" I nodded. "Then they're already inside you." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "The water here isn't just water. It's them, part of them. They can exist within any water system, lakes, rain, pipes, even blood." Before I could process this, we heard it. A wet, slithering sound on the porch. The temperature dropped further. Frost crept across the inside of the windows. "Turn on the device," I whispered. Victor flipped switches. A high-pitched hum filled the air, making my teeth ache. The frost stopped spreading. "We have maybe an hour." Before they adapt, he said, we need a plan. But I was distracted by a strange sensation in my throat, a burning, tingling feeling. I ran to the bathroom mirror and pulled down my collar. Thin slits had formed on either side of my neck, red and raw like fresh cuts. "Victor," I called, my voice breaking. "I think I'm changing." He came and looked, his expression grim. "It's happening faster than it did with Frank. They must be getting stronger. What's happening to me? They're remaking you. Your body is adapting to exist in their world." He hesitated. Gill structures, enhanced vision underwater, eventually decreased need for air. My mind raced back through the past week, how colors seemed brighter after swimming, how I could hold my breath longer each time, how water felt more natural against my skin than air. "The government research team," I said suddenly. "What do they want with these creatures?" Victor's silence told me everything. "Weapons," I said. "They want to use their abilities as weapons." He nodded slowly. "Control water, you control everything. Imagine soldiers who can breathe underwater, ships that never sink, missiles guided by rainfall patterns." A crash from the front of the cabin cut our conversation short. Through the frost-covered windows, we could see them clearly now. The deep ones, taller than humans, with elongated limbs that moved as if they had extra joints. Their skin was nearly transparent, showing organs that pulsed with blue-green light. Where eyes should be, they had dark pools that reflected like water. But most disturbing was how they flickered, sometimes solid, sometimes liquid, as if they couldn't decide which form to take. "The device isn't working anymore," Victor said. The front door burst open, water rushing in like a tide, forming itself into more of the creatures. Victor grabbed my arm. "The basement. There's another way out." We ran down the stairs, but water was already seeping through the foundation walls. It pooled on the floor, then rose up to block our path. I stopped, suddenly calm. "I need to talk to them." "Elaine, no." But something had changed inside me. Those little slits on my neck were burning, but not with pain, with need. I needed water, not to drink, but to breathe. I stepped forward into the rising pool. The water climbed my body, not soaking my clothes, but flowing around them, touching my skin directly, and I heard them, not with my ears, but somehow through my skin. Vibrations that formed words in my mind. "Boundary keeper," they said. "Last of the line." Images flooded my consciousness. Ancient treaties signed in blood and water. My ancestors standing guard at lakes and rivers. Uncle Frank discovering the truth of his heritage. "Our territory," they continued. "Stolen by your kind. Poisoned. Boundaries broken." More images. Factories dumping waste into rivers, dams blocking ancient pathways, climate change altering rainfall patterns that had existed for millennia. "We reclaim," they said, "as the pact allows when broken." The basement, filled with more of them now, their translucent bodies glowing softly in the darkness. Victor stood frozen against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. "What do you want from me?" I asked, surprised to find I could speak underwater. Complete the change, join us as ambassador." A sound like thunder shook the house. From upstairs came shouts and the heavy thud of boots. "Government team," Victor gasped. "They're here." One of the creatures moved toward him, water flowing up his body. He screamed, then went rigid as water poured into his mouth, his eyes, his ears. "Stop!" I shouted. The creature paused, turning its liquid gaze to me. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll be your ambassador, but you can't hurt him." The water receded from Victor, who collapsed, coughing. Boots pounded on the stairs. Flashlight beams cut through the water-filled basement. "Dr. Morrison," a voice called. "We're here to help you." But I knew what kind of help they offered. The same help they'd offered Uncle Frank. Use us to study the deep ones, learn their secrets, turn their abilities into weapons. I made my choice. I dove deeper into the water, which no longer felt cold. The creatures surrounded me. Their liquid, forms merging with mine. The slits on my neck opened fully, drawing in water that somehow let me breathe. The basement wall crumbled inward, revealing the underwater cave system my uncle had mapped. As armed men in diving gear poured into the basement, I swam into the darkness of the cave, the deep ones moving with me. Behind us, I heard muffled gunshots. Ahead, I felt the vast network of underwater passages stretching throughout the peninsula, ancient highways of the deep that would take us to safety. As we swam, I felt my body continuing to change. Webbing forming between my fingers, my eyes adapting to see perfectly in the dark water. But it wasn't just physical changes. My mind was expanding too, connecting to every drop of water around me. I could feel rain falling miles away, taste the difference between river and lake, sense the boundaries where fresh water met salt. Most incredibly, I could feel the consciousness of the deep ones merging with mine, not taking over, but joining, sharing their ancient memories. I understood then what Uncle Frank had discovered. These weren't monsters. They were the original guardians of the water systems that gave life to this land. And they had chosen our family, generation after generation, to remember the pacts, to maintain the boundaries. I also understood why they were surfacing now. Climate change was altering their world faster than ever before. They needed a voice in the human world, someone who could exist in both realms. As we emerged into the vast lake far from my uncle's cabin, I knew I would never return to my old life. The academic scandal, my human concerns, they seemed trivial now. I had a new purpose. Floating in the center of the lake under the night sky, surrounded by my new kin, I made a silent promise to Uncle Frank that I would finish his work. I would document everything, using science to bridge the gap between worlds, to help humans understand before it was too late. The deep ones sensed my thoughts and responded with approval, ripples of consciousness flowing between us. They showed me our next destination, a deeper, older place where I would complete my transformation. As we dove down toward the bottom of the lake, I felt no fear, only a strange sense of coming home to a place I'd never been.